My mother went into shock and looked up at me. She says, "Mercy me, is that what you've been doing?" I says, I guess so, but I didn't know what we were doing. They told us we were making baby carriages and all kind of ridiculous things, that we knew weren't true.
That was Lillian Schklar, one of the women who volunteered to work on the Manhattan Project in Oak Ridge, helping us win World War II. Now in her mid-90s, she's still volunteering, marking her 13th year as an RSVP volunteer with 50 Forward's Friends Learning Impairs program. Lillian was the recipient of a Mary Catherine Strobel Volunteer Award in 2017 for her outstanding volunteer efforts.
I'm Sally Hussey, the CEO of 50 Forward, and we elected to launch this podcast because we know older adults have such inspiring stories and wisdom worth sharing. We have now all learned that social connections are critical to our well-being. This podcast is made possible by 50 Forward, the leading resource for adults 50 plus in Middle Tennessee who seek to live longer, more fulfilling lives.
You're listening to Squeeze the Day, where we talk to extraordinary people over the age of 50 who are living their best life now. Their stories are both inspiring and encouraging to all of us as we seek to navigate a meaningful and purpose-driven second chapter of life. I'm Susan Sizemore, Communications Director for 50 Forward, and I'll be your host as we discover the captivating and encouraging stories of those around us. Now let's get started. Recently, we marked the 75th anniversary of the bombing of Hiroshima. I'm sure that brings back memories to you. What do you remember about that?
Well, I had not been home long from Oak Ridge, and I really didn't know what I had been doing, so there was not much discussion except just a situation of living in the dorms and this type thing with Mother. You'd have to know my mama to appreciate this. She lived to be 100, but anyway, we were standing by this old radio in the sitting room at home. We didn't have electricity, so we were listening to this big old radio with a big battery down on a shelf underneath us. And we had heard that this was coming on, so we were listening to see what was happening in the war effort. So it came on that the bomb had been dropped and all the damage it had done. And then they went into the spiel of where and how it had been made, the bomb. And they said it was made in Oak Ridge, Tennessee. My mother went into shock and looked up at me. She says, "Mercy me, is that what you've been doing?" I says, I guess so, but I didn't know what we were doing. They told us we were making baby carriages and all kind of ridiculous things, that we knew weren't true. But that's when I found out. So I was as shocked as Mother was to see what we had been doing.
How did you end up getting your job at Oak Ridge?
Well, I was a senior in high school getting ready for graduation in the spring. And these two fellows came to the school soliciting help at Oak Ridge to work in the war effort. Well, I had a brother in the South Pacific on a mine sweep, and I had a cousin, General Patnick, going across Europe. So anything I could do for the war effort, I was right in there, ready to go. So I volunteered one of the first ones. So that's how I found out about it. And I graduated 1 week, and I was on my way to Oak Ridge the following week on the old Tennessee Central Railroad.
That's quite a first job. Tell us a bit about your time at Oak Ridge. I know you were there in 1944 and 45. This was a pivotal period in your life. What exactly was your job?
I was a cubicle operator number 2. And we were sitting in front of these huge, that was the largest building I have ever seen in my life. I haven't seen one before or since. Anyway, it was oval shaped, it looked like. And we had all of these little things here. They were probably 3 feet wide and nothing but meters all in front. And there must have been 25 or 30 different meters on it. And we had earphones on, similar to this. And we'd get a call somewhere over inside the circle. We didn't know what. and they say you need to just such and such a meter to such and such a reading, and that's what we did all day. And we were on a tall stool sitting in front of these screens. That was what my job was.
Most workers at the lab really knew only enough to do their jobs. They were unaware they were building that bomb, much less the most destructive bomb in human history. At the time, did you know you were part of building a bomb?
No, I didn't know what we were doing, but it was just for the war effort, and that's all I needed to know. I was ready to go to anything. I had tried to volunteer for the WAFs in the spring in Nashville, but I wasn't old enough, but I told him I was. But of course, he said, now, if you're still 18 in the morning, you come back and we'll get your paperwork done. Of course, I never went back because I was only 17. So I was ready to go.
At one point, you told me a story about someone offering you a little tour behind the scenes as one of the women who worked up front. Can you tell us a bit about that?
Well, actually, it was one of the fellows. All the men worked over inside this circle. I didn't know what it was. And I was country girl, so I was never bashful. So he came by and says, Miss Hickman, would you like to see what we're doing over inside here? And there was steps every so often going up to the top of this thing and a walkway that went around the top. And I says, "Oh yes, I'm ready to go." So we went up the steps and around the top and down inside this thing, and there were fellows sitting on little stools, like they were sitting almost on the floor, looking at a little thing. It looked like later I would have called it a Boy Scout safe, but anyhow, it looked like a little safe. So one of the fellows, I thought he was old. He was probably 35 or 40. He called me over to show me what he was doing. So I went over and he says, "Well, come on down here closer." I said, "Okay." So I came down and just a little closer. So I got down right where I could see the figures going around the little meter here. And all of a sudden, this was in 44, and we wore hair up with bobby pins and curls all on top. And I bent over and I felt my hair crawling on my head. All of a sudden, all of the bobby pins flew out and flew on the face of this thing. And I went into shock. But by this time, all of the other fellows in this circle had come over to watch this action. They were all laughing. They were so hysterical about it. So thereafter, I was called Hairless Joe because all of my hair fell in my face. So that's how I found out what they had told us, that they had to have all of their tools and the watches and everything demagnetized. Well, I went to a little two-room country school out in the country, so I didn't know what magnetized meant. So that's what this was, a magnetic field that pulled all the pins out of my hair. So that was my introduction.
A story surfaced not too long ago that some of the Manhattan Project's leading scientists tried to get Harry S. Truman to call off the bombings, but their requests never reached the president's desk. In fact, they were stored away until they were declassified in 1958. How did that make you feel?
Well, at first I was shocked, but then I sat there and thought about it a minute. And I thought, well, I'm not sorry we dropped it because if the war would have gone on a lot longer, there would have been more lives lost. And so it was better to get it settled right then. So I was glad it dropped.
So you lived on a farm your whole life until you got to Oak Ridge, and then you shared space with other people. Tell us about your dorm life.
What a shock. I lived at home was a big old plantation house. And my little room wasn't as big as the closet in my room at home, but it had room for a single bed and a little side table by the bed and a little closet that looked like a little broom closet. But anyway, it took care of me. But the biggest thing I had a problem with was the noise. We worked rotating shifts, and I hadn't been used to trying to sleep with any noise going on. So when I was working night shift, was supposed to sleep during the day. I didn't get much sleep because I couldn't sleep with all the noise that was going on. And then I couldn't get used to the joint showers. Oh, we had separate shower stalls, but there were about 10, I think, to the room, plus the lavatories and everything. So I was a little shocked at that. So that's the biggest thing I had. I don't know if I told you about one day I would try to get the last shower next to the wall and would wait for that because there were hooks around the wall to hang our clothes on. So I got undressed in the shower stall and reached out behind the curtain and hung my clothes on the wall. And then I would take my shower and reach out and get my clothes after I dried off and dress inside the shower. So I didn't have to go out with nothing on. Well, I heard the girls laughing one day, and before I stepped out or reached out, I looked first to see if my clothes were there, and they weren't. So I thought for a minute, what am I going to do? Then I took the shower curtain off the rod, wrapped up in it, and went back to my room. They didn't do it anymore.
Very resourceful. So you were home a month after Oak Ridge, and then I understand you went to work at Fort Knox. What was that like?
Well, that was rather interesting. That was a little different, but it was a little more open and a little more free than Oak Ridge. And we had two POWs from Germany working at the PX. I was in PX number 8. And I just worked kind of counter, helping the soldiers. Most of them were fresh recruits, and they were half of them scared to death, didn't know what was going on. So that's what I did there. But it was very interesting and working there. And I enjoyed that too because the war still wasn't over. And I enjoyed helping the young fellows there that were so frightened and ill at ease from being away from home with strangers. And I tried to be a friend.
Tell us a little bit about your upbringing and your family.
Well, I had, I guess, a typical farm girl's life, but I didn't think so. Mother and daddy, they always taught us that we were special and we could do anything if we set our mind to it. And they were behind us, whatever we tried to do. And some little lady that I was talking to at one of the retirement homes, she would be out one day when I was talking to them recently about mother letting me go to Oak Ridge. What was she thinking? And I explained to her that mother thought I had a mind, and if I wanted to do it and it was a good cause, then she was behind me 100%. And that's the way it was through school and everything else. They had a problem, they'd go to school with us, and we all worked together. And my brothers worked on the farm, of course, but my father was a old-fashioned gentleman. Women didn't work in the fields or the yards or anything. We were above that. We just took care of the house. But anyway, he would let us work in the garden because that was our pleasure. I had 3 brothers. I had 2 older and one sister older than me. And then 10 years after I was born, mother had a little boy. I thought he was mine. He was the cutest child. And I had a lot of care of him because when mother was busy, I would take care of Butch. Yeah. So I had a good life on the farm. I wouldn't trade it for anything.
So I know you've lived through a lot of tragedies, and I'm curious, what gives you confidence about a better tomorrow?
I have to look forward and try to be positive about everything. And everything, all the hard knocks, as mother used to call them, that I went through, I learned from them. And if you try to think positive and stay with your thoughts ahead, you can pull through most anything, especially if you've got somebody at your back.
So you're a committed volunteer in the community, aren't you? And can you tell us a bit about why that's so important to you?
I've just enjoyed doing it. I've enjoyed all of my volunteering, my organizations, and that is one thing that has really helped me more than I've helped them, I think, is working with the different organizations. I was worked with Eastern Star, and I worked with the Boy Scouts. I was a den mother, and the AARP. I was president of that and worked with them on different projects. And I just enjoy working with people and being with people, and as long as I've got a good book and a job to look forward to, I'm good to go.
You're also a longtime volunteer and mentor in the 50 Forward Friends Learning in Pairs program. And I know today you're concerned about not being in school, but also missing the students. Can you tell us a little bit about serving as a tutor for students who may need a little help?
I have enjoyed that so very much. I had a couple of little boys that the parents spoke no English, so they didn't have much way of communicating except at school. And with me, I had one little boy. The first day I met with him, they are so precious. Anyway, he looked up at me with those big eyes and he said, "Did you speak Espanol?" "Honey, I do well to speak English." Well, he just thought that was fantastic that he could do something that I couldn't. So, and I just enjoyed talking to him. We've spent about half our time communicating with each other, and then we would read or study. But they enjoyed the one-on-one, somebody to speak with and talk to and could talk about little things.
What would you say is the biggest benefit you receive by interacting with these young students who could be your great grandchildren?
It benefits me because they live in a different world that I grew up in, and I try to fall in line with them. And I think I told you one little girl named Machina. We were reading a story about light, and she stopped it. She says, "Oh, I like light." I says, "I do too, because when I grew up, we didn't have electricity." "What did you do?" she said. I says, "We had kerosene lamps." "What's that?" So I started describing it to her, and she stopped and looked up at me with all earnestness. She says, "Did you know George Washington?" I laughed. I says, "Well, he was a little before my time." She says, "I bet you knew Mr. Lincoln." I said, "Sometimes I think I did." So I was impressed that she knew who George and Abe were. They are so, they just say what they think without, they don't think about it because there's nothing to think about. They just say what they want to say. And it's always so enlightening, and it makes you appreciate that that shows what they think of you and the world that they're growing up in. It's different than mine. When I was talking to them, I felt so benefited by it, and so privileged to be able to help somebody instead of sitting home twiddling my thumbs saying, "Woe is me." So I just, I just enjoyed them so much.
So, intergenerational sharing is important because we learn so much from one another. Do you have words of wisdom to offer to those who might be following in your footsteps?
As I've told so many people that ask me how I had such a long, happy marriage, well, you know, we were partners. We had respect for each other. And I think as long as you can have going respect for your fellow man and working with them and trying to understand them, they will help understand yourself. And it's just not living in your own world, it's living in a world of everybody. And I think it's healthier. My mother was like that. She was friends with everybody. She never looked down on anyone. I don't care who they were. And if you said something snide or bad about them, she would find something good to counteract it. So I've tried to be like her.
That's a great model to follow. So, you won a Strobel Award for your volunteer efforts with the 50 Forward Friends Learning in Pairs program, and your acceptance speech just wowed the audience. In fact, you were doing it totally off the cuff, and they were on their feet giving you a standing ovation. It was simply fabulous. What do you remember about that day?
Well, the reason I was gussied up that night, my grandchildren had been in town with my daughter, and they had taken me to have my nails done. I never had that done. I always kept my nails polished for a long time now. My sister said I should have been a boy because I never paid a lot of attention to jewelry and makeup and all of that. But everything was just perfect with her. She was real meticulous about everything. But they had me fixed up. I don't know if they knew something I didn't know or not, but anyhow, they had me all fixed up. So I was really excited that I had been nominated and that I had gotten that far, but I just couldn't believe that I would be number one with all they had to choose from. But when they called my name, it took me several days to get my mind focused on it. But that night was fabulous. I was so impressed with the building. For one thing, it's the first time I'd been in that new building. And having my children there, I was so pleased with that. I've often remarked that I'm the luckiest old woman in the world with my family. But anyway, when they called my name, my youngest son was there, and my daughter had driven up from Georgia to be there with me. So they were sitting on either side of me. And my son reached around he said I took a deep breath like I was about to faint. Anyway, he reached around me and patted my shoulder and whispered in my ear that I was going to be fine. I could handle anything. So I went up there and I just started talking. It was fantastic. It was just really amazing. When I think about it, I can't believe it.
It was fantastic. What do you use as therapy to stay so positively focused?
Well, just my mind, I guess. Some people think I'm a little touched. That's just my thinking. I just can't wallow in my misery. I just not going to do it. So I stay positive. And as I said, as long as I've got a good book and one of my word puzzles, I'm good to go.
What do you do to stay young and engaged?
Just live. I just I don't have a plan. I just, as my youngest son says, I just hang loose and go forward. And that's the way I live.
Can you tell us a bit about your love for music?
Oh, I've always loved music. My mother, when I was little, we never had much money, but we had everything else we needed. But she knew how I liked movies and I loved music. So she would go by the library when they came to town, and I would keep my little baby brother, and she would drop us off at the library. And I'd pick me out a couple of books to take home with me for that week and read. And then we always had a radio and the battery kind, and I could always listen to my music. I had several old songbooks, and I'd sing, and she'd sing with me, and I just loved music. And my brother played the guitar, and we'd sit out on the doorstep at night looking at the stars, and he'd play the guitar, and I'd sing. So we just enjoyed it.
So here's a question we're asking all of our guests, and it relates to family and your parents. What's one piece of advice your parents gave you that at the time you thought was silly, but now rings true or is a guiding principle in your everyday life?
Mother always told me, and I thought it was a little far fetched, but anyway, she says, whatever I was going through, whatever was bothering me, she says, well, honey, just take it with a grain of salt and it'll be smoothed out. I said, what in the world has salt got to do with it? She says, well, salt just makes everything sweeter. So, so I still think of her when I really get a problem. I just this stuff. She said, take it with a grain of salt and go on.
That seems to have worked. So, Lillian, another question we're asking everyone is what is it that you do to squeeze the day?
Try to be happy, try to be comfortable, and try to take things in my stride, whatever comes my way. And usually, if when I do that, I can handle it. With any of my illnesses or whatever happens to me, I just take it a day at a time.
That's great. Thank you for sharing everything you have with us today and for joining us. What an amazing life of leadership we're witnessing from interviews and from stories such as yours. Now we challenge everyone listening to go squeeze the day.